let's go ahead and talk about Hillary. So this has been all over the place, and there's a lot going on in terms of the actual findings. So the long-awaited Durham trial, which has basically become a meme online, has actually been happening. So let's put this up there on the screen. This is according to testimony from Robbie Mook. You guys might remember that name. It was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager testifying in the trial regarding Michael Sussman. Now, what he says is that Hillary Clinton personally approved leaking to the media information alleging a connection between Donald Trump and a Russian bank in 2016, which the campaign itself had not fully confirmed. This is the infamous Alpha Bank report that took the world by storm in the closing days of the 2016 election, in which there was an allegation that there was a data between some servers linking the Trump organization and Alpha Bank. That is a Russian financial institution with ties to the Kremlin. That was originally reported by Franklin Foer over at The Atlantic and in Slate, where he wrote this up and was used as a so-called corroborating evidence. This is the infamous tweet that Hillary sent on that day. Let's put this up there on the screen. October 31st, 2016. Computer scientists have apparently uncovered a covert server linking the Trump organization to a Russian-based bank. This was regarding the Franklin Foer report, who also works at The Atlantic, but he wrote it up in Slate, showing that the Trump organization has a, quote, secret server registered to Trump Tower that has been covertly communicating with Russia. Noteworthy, it was signed at that time by Hillary for America senior policy advisor Jake Sullivan, who is the current national security advisor to the United States for President Biden. So obviously, he remains well ensconced in Democratic politics. And I think that all of this matters because, first of all, I mean, I know it was 6 years ago, but I do think it is empirically nuts that Hillary, at this point, we know that she lied for years about whether they funded the dossier, the Steele dossier, and they did. We know that her lawyers, you know, and the Perkins Coie law firm and others were intimately involved in pushing a lot of this, that it basically was a Democratic, and by that I mean like it was a Hillary Clinton operation that was in conjunction with the FBI, that they explicitly went and briefed them on all of these fake accusations. And really, I mean, Alpha Bank and others, while it did show the most insanity of Russiagate, this was a national conversation for 2 straight years about Trump and Russia, which at the time did, I think, tremendous damage to this country. I mean, beyond the Democratic base, gaslighting them into thinking that the election was stolen by Russians, which a majority of them did actually. At the time, you also had a complete media obsession when there could have been an obsession around, I don't know, literally anything else, which was actually true. So, you know, it's been 6 years. I guess everybody also knew that this was the case, but it just shows you that Hillary's fingerprints were on this at the very, very highest level. There's
a lot that's relevant here. I mean, first of all, the fact that there was an intentional effort by the Clinton campaign to basically say, like, how do we spin this law so it doesn't fall on us? Because obviously you lose to Donald Trump, like, the obvious person to blame is you, right? You didn't campaign in the Midwest. You were a terrible candidate. You leaned into this campaign strategy of just sort of like going wherever Trump went, responding to his tweets and responding to his actions rather than trying to lay out your own campaign. Like, you are to blame for this loss. And so to the extent that, you know, Donald Trump was seen as this existential threat by the Democratic base, the very obvious person to blame would be Hillary Clinton. Instead, they've engaged in this very intentional campaign of subterfuge to push the blame off to all sorts of people. One of them, you know, one of those claims being like, oh, it's Russia's fault, basically. So this is also part of that effort for the Clintons and that whole world, which is the entirety of establishment Democratic politics, to escape any kind of scrutiny for how you could possibly lose to this man and put the country in this situation. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of the actual details here, and this was Robbie Mook that testified. So this was the, you know,
under oath on the stand.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, this isn't like some nobody. This was the chair of the head of the campaign. He said effectively Hillary signed off on this idea that even though they couldn't as a campaign confirm these claims or that this connection was real, that they would leak it to press outlets. And at that very same time, Slate runs with it. and gives them the piece that they want, and that's the one that they go with. The New York Times also runs an article, but it is much more cautious, and it includes the key piece of information that the FBI had already basically investigated and debunked these claims.
Right.
So if it had just been the New York Times piece, they wouldn't have had much to work with. But because Slate went with a much more sensationalistic and much more sort of leading piece here that left the question open, that was what enabled them to kind of lean into this. So that's extremely significant to your point about the damage that was done and why we're still talking about this so many years later. It really did change the way that the Democratic base viewed Russia, and it changed the way the Republican base viewed Russia. So now you have a situation where, views have, in certain instances, flipped. You have much more room on the Republican side of the aisle, for example, to be questioning of the amount of military aid that is flowing to Ukraine. And of course, I've talked about how disingenuous some of these actors ultimately are. But the fact remains that the only no votes against this gigantic tens of billions of dollars in new aid, most of it, military aid, going to Ukraine, came to the Republican side of the aisle. This whole episode made the Democratic base much more hawkish towards Russia. And, the very latest is, let's go ahead and put this last tear sheet up on the screen. The very latest is the Pentagon is apparently weighing deploying special forces to guard the Kyiv embassy. So basically, a small number of boots on the ground in Ukraine, something that was supposed to be totally off the table. And the reason why we've been able to so easily slide down the slippery slope closer and closer to direct confrontation with a nuclear-armed superpower in Russia is because you have a Democratic base that has been primed to see Russia as this all-powerful, all-knowing, existential, world-dominating, election-interfering threat. And that has made it a lot more difficult to have clear thinking and any sort of public debate and scrutiny over the administration's truly extraordinary actions with regard to Russia right now.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. I mean, the impact this has had on our, I think I did one of my last monologues on Rising was actually about this. It was the real cost of Russiagate. And it was about how, I think at the time it was the Atlantic Council. And there was this Democratic aligned people who were, promoting a realist foreign policy view, which I mostly subscribe to, were basically railroaded and forced out of the Institute, and there was an uproar over there because
I remember that.
I don't even remember exactly what they said, but they were hey, maybe expanding NATO might have increased tension with Russia. It was something completely anodyne, and then boom, it was just went completely against them. So that was at an institutional level, at a Democratic-based level, and on a policy level, it changed our posture to Russia forever, I think, towards that nation. And all you have to do is compare how Barack Obama reacted to the Russian annexation of Crimea to how the Biden administration has approached it now. And you can go back and read quotes of Obama saying things which would, call him a traitor now, where he says things like, Crimea is a core Russian national security interest. If you think we should go to war for that, you should justify it, because I don't think that that's one as core to Ukraine. It's wow, that's something I haven't heard anybody in national politics espouse that type of sentiment.
What was his line to Romney, the 80s called?
And the 80s called, and they want the foreign policy. He was right, about in terms of moving towards the Asia Pacific and how that was the future. But all of that worldview has been completely cast out the window, all because of Russia. And you can go and look back at, Obamagate, which I'm reliving now in my head, and it all is a direct result of the fact that the Clinton campaign, and actually did also push the FBI and even the high levels of the Obama administration to all try and conjure up this narrative, which simply did not exist, and not only hampered the incoming administration, but changed our politics probably forever. And that was not done in a good way.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.